Hi, I'm Peter Steinberg. I'm the director of the Sydney Institute of Marine Science and also the director of the World Harbour Project. And I'm here talking to you on a beautiful day in Sydney Harbour. So the World Harbour Project is a global research framework that focuses in on the importance of urban marine and estuarine environments. So if you think about it, we live in an increasingly urban world. So more than 50% of people, of humanity, now live in cities, and more than 50% of people live on the coast. In some places like Australia, fully 20% of the population lives in a single coastal city, Sydney, where I'm talking to you from today. So it's really important that we consider the sustainability and management of urban marine environments. The World Harbour Project was launched here in Sydney in 2014. Since then, it has grown to a truly global partnership. It now includes over 30 cities on 6 continents. It includes some 130 scientists and institutions at those different cities. And it includes some of the truly iconic cities in the world, as well as so-called megacities. Partners include New York City, Shanghai, Rio de Janeiro, Singapore, and of course here in Sydney, as well as many others. As well as being home to the World Harbour Project headquarters at the Sydney Institute of Marine Science, Sydney is of course also one of the partner cities of the World Harbour Project. It's an iconic global city, and the Sydney Opera House behind me is truly one of the instantly recognizable coastal buildings on the planet. So as you can see behind me, Sydney Harbour can be absolutely spectacular. And for those of you in cold cities in the Northern Hemisphere, this in fact is winter. Sydney Harbour has enormous biodiversity. It has more species of fish than the entire United Kingdom. But it also faces significant challenges. Sydney Harbour has some of the highest levels of heavy metals in the sediments of any harbour that we've measured. It also is heavily armoured. That is, over 50% of the coastline of Sydney Harbour is artificial. It's built of seawalls or jetties or artificial structures. So there are significant challenges to address in Sydney Harbour, as in all the other cities around. And that will only increase as the population in those cities continues to grow. By 2050, Sydney will have grown from 5 million people to 7 million people. And all the consequences of urbanization will have an impact on the harbour. So the goal of the World Harbour Project is to use the shared experience, the shared understanding of cities across the world to try and address the kinds of problems that Sydney faces, as well as all the other cities across the project and across the world. The science of the World Harbour Project is designed to address some of the most pressing problems that urban marine environments face today. But we also want to do it in a solutions-focused way. So that is, we need to understand the science and the mechanisms underlying some of the issues faced by urban marine environments. But we also want to try and fix things where we can. And that takes at least 3 forms. So we want to do the research that can inform policymakers and managers so they can manage urban marine environments in a more effective way. We also want to do research so if there are fixes, things we can actively do to enhance these environments, then we want to do that as well. And then finally, importantly, we want to engage with the public, we want to engage with governments so that we can increase an understanding and hopefully an appreciation for these critical environments. Because after all, it's the people living in those cities who ultimately will use and enjoy those marine environments. So that overarching rationale for the World Harbour Project has led us to structure the project around 4 working groups or thematic areas. So the first one of those is water and sediment quality. So all urban environments have enormous inputs from the populace and from those cities into the waterways. So we want to understand those contaminants, we want to understand their distribution, we want to understand their effect. So the range of possible influences includes anything from heavy metals to plastics, which has become a worldwide issue in the last few years. The second issue, the second working group, is the green or eco-engineering theme. So if you think about it, urban sprawl is not restricted to the land. It spills over intensively into waterways. So we build piers and jetties and cooling systems and entire buildings and even islands into our urban waterways. Mostly we build those in a way that do not facilitate ecosystem function, do not facilitate biodiversity. So we're working on designs and structures that can enhance the sustainability of those novel environments, the built marine infrastructure. A third area, third working group, is multiple uses and users. So cities are classic examples of everybody wanting to do everything at the same time in the same place. And so people want to fish, they want to swim, they want to use harbors for industrial uses, they may want to establish aquaculture farms, and somehow those multiple uses and the potential for user conflicts have to be managed. So that's very much a socio-ecological and socioeconomic problem. And so the World Harbour Project has a working group that addresses those issues. What are community attitudes towards the different uses of our harbors? How are those managed? And then finally, we care very much about the propagation of the work that we do to the broader community and to school kids and university students. So the fourth working group is an education and engagement group where we try and do just that. We try and engage with the broader population, inform them about what the work they do, and hopefully give them our appreciation for having a clean and healthy urban marine environment. Working Group 1 of the World Harbour Project focuses on the health and quality of our sediment and waterways of our global harbors. The multitude of activities of, in some cases, millions of humans around our harbors places enormous pressure on those ecosystems. We want to understand what those pressures are and what the risks to our use of those harbors are through developing new methods of assessment and new methods of understanding how those contaminants relate to the risk of using those harbors. There are three current projects in Working Group 1. The first is the development of new molecular methods as indicators of sewage inputs, including human pathogens. The second is a global analysis of the risk from heavy metal contamination in the sediments in our harbors. And the third is a more qualitative approach to environmental risk assessment that we hope will be broadly accessible to harbors across the world.
I'm Sandra McClellan, and I'm a professor in the School of Freshwater Sciences at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. And my lab has been developing new ways to test for water quality for more than 10 years. When we think about how we've done water quality historically, it's been the same organism that we try and track, E. coli. And that's good because it's in the gut of all animals and humans. So if there's any kind of pollution there that can carry waterborne pathogens, we'll detect it. But in dense urban areas, it's really a challenge to understand why we don't have clean water. We can have sewage overflows, agricultural runoff coming in from downstream, and then also just urban runoff. So when we see poor water quality, the big question is, where is it coming from? It's been great working at the Sydney Institute of Marine Sciences for the past couple of months. I'm actually here on sabbatical, and over the last 2 years I've been working remotely with this great group on the World Harbour Project. It was fun to come in January and start working side by side on the different data we've been collecting and our plans for sequencing. Over the next couple of months, we're really going to be compiling this data and coming with some conclusions. And some of the scientists that I'm working with here are going to be visiting me in Wisconsin as we put together all of this as a great publication that I really think is going to have a big impact on the field. The World Harbour Project is a great opportunity to really rethink how we're testing for water quality. So as we've developed new indicators on the laboratory side, now we have 18 cities where we can go out and really test side by side what kind of information do we get from just measuring E. coli, our historic indicator, and what kind of information can we get from these new indicators. And I think the overall goal is really to change the way we're testing for water quality. And the World Harbour Project is giving us a great start on that. With 18 cities kind of scattered globally, we really get every possible scenario. You know, very developed nations and developing nations, and cities that are really dense urban development and some that have more urban sprawl.
Hello, my name is Anna Chiara and I'm going to present one of the key initiatives of the Working Group 1, the Microbial Project. Sewage, stormwater and agricultural runoff transport fecal materials, pathogens and chemicals into the waterways and consequently have a direct effect on ecological condition and recreational use of estuaries, beaches and other marine habitats. The source of the sewage inputs and fecal material profoundly influence the risks to both human health and marine life. Sources include wastewater treatment plants, untreated sewage, agricultural runoff and wildlife. Areas densely inhabited, such as harbour, ports and cities, receive various inputs, increasing the risk of illnesses associated with fecal contaminants. This doesn't concern not only Sydney, but all coastal cities globally. However, the big challenge is how to track the source of these inputs and quantify the risk to human and ecological health. Globally, the most common and accepted method for estimating fecal concentration with aquatic system is via culturing and plating of Enterococci and E. coli. The presence of these bacteria at a prior determined concentration is then used to state whether a water body is suitable or not for human recreational use, like swimming. However, this method doesn't discriminate between human, livestock and wildlife. As such, it is not possible to determine whether the fecal material is of high risk, like contains human pathogens, or elevated by a lower risk source, like wildlife pathogens. This leads to the unnecessary closure of recreational areas, or worse still, sites may remain open in cases where there is a high risk of human pathogens but low overall concentration of fecal material. Thanks to molecular protocols that are very robust, like qPCR and how-to-output sequencing, in collaboration with Professor Sandra McClellan from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, we are applying specific gene marker assays that can determine the origin of the contaminants and what kind of pathogens are present.
Overall, the preliminary results of the international study clearly support our initial hypothesis, with no clear relationship being found between culture-level Enterococci and E. coli and human fecal gene markers. The fecal gene markers target for two human-specific bacterial families, Lactobacillus and Bacteroides. These bacterial families live in the human gut and co-evolve with us, making them great human fecal indicators. There are several sites with low microbial count but high qPCR gene markers. This suggests that in cases when recreational areas remain open, there may actually be potential risk to human health. Vice versa, there were some sites with high microbial count and low qPCR gene markers. This suggests that in cases where public recreational spaces are closed to a perceived risk of human health, that the closure is not warranted. These preliminary results emphasize the limitation of the count approach currently being used internationally by regulatory agencies. The evidence from the preliminary results suggests that there may be a better way to discriminate the source and types of fecal materials into marine waters, and thereby provide a better diagnosis of the condition of a waterway with regards to human and ecological health.
However, it has yet to be determined if the observed trend is truly universal. To address this, the World Harbour Project has initiated an extensive international study to examine the relationship between traditional and molecular markers, 16S amplicons and qPCR assays, associated with the sewage input into harbour systems. This novel and cutting-edge project is in collaboration between 18 cities around the world, capturing a diverse range of inputs, environments and climates. Moreover, we are going to expand the research to other molecular assays targeting antibacterial resistance, Archobacter, viruses, and specific assay developed by Sandra McClellan Group and other World Harbour Project collaborators. The project commenced in early 2018 with more than 1,200 samples being collected worldwide. Now the fun begins.
One of the key ways that the World Harbour Project tries to disseminate the information that we've generated is through a series of webinars that have been developed by the Educational Working Group number 4. Here we have Dr. Anthony Sheridan from Sydney and Dr. Ana Gomez from Cantabria in Spain talking about contamination in harbours, both how to measure it, the risks involved, and how we might solve the problem of contamination.
The rivers get rated from estuaries from A to F, A being excellent obviously, and F being a fail. So they've got lots of estuaries to do and they're doing it monthly. So the issue is that there's no way they can collect macrobenefits data to provide ecological endpoints. So to date, really it's based on mainly on physical chemical measurements, turbidity, and also habitat.
Harbours are complex systems. In harbours we have human activities that introduce substances, materials to the environment. These kind of substances affect to the ecosystem.
Hi, I'm Edwina Tanner from the World Harbour Project office here in Sydney, Australia. Looking at harbours and estuaries from the surface does not give you the whole picture of what's going on below. Working Group 1 has been looking beneath the surface waters of World Harbour estuaries to see the effect that toxic chemical mixtures buried in the sediments at the bottom of these urbanised harbours is having on benthic marine life. The common problem of heavy metal pollution contaminating sediments hidden in the depth of world harbours and estuaries is due to legacy industry and stormwater pollution from urbanisation that's increasing in harbour cities globally. Working Group 1 has analysed and mapped contaminated sediments from 11 world harbours using a method that determines the toxicity of the combined chemical mixtures of copper, lead and zinc. Using this scheme, together with the large globally distributed data sets from the World Harbour Project partners, has meant that for the first time we can compare the level of risk of benthic communities from sediments of estuaries globally. The maps we produce show areas that pose the highest risk of adverse effects to sediment-dwelling animals, with the results providing harbour users and managers with a screening tool that assesses waterways for regions of toxicity. The results of the 8 world harbours mapped out here have areas of high biological risk shown in red, with areas of blue being of little or no concern. The orange and green areas indicate medium to low risks and adverse effects to benthic populations. We can see from all the blue areas on the maps of Darwin Harbour in Australia and Waitemata Harbour in New Zealand that these harbours pose little or no risk to their benthic communities. Hong Kong Harbour in China and Dublin Harbour in Ireland show areas that have largely green, indicating that the sediments of these harbours pose little or no risk of toxicity to their benthic populations, even though these harbours are adjacent to highly urbanised cities. Santander Harbour and Rio de Vigo in Spain are known for their biological diversity and productivity, making them ideal locations for fisheries. Both estuaries have some evidence of medium to high toxicity to benthic animals, particularly for the sediments surrounding the city, shown in orange, where the effects of urban and industrial waste are evident, that decline towards the entrance of the harbours. As for Sydney Harbour with its sparkling surface waters, it can be seen from the red and orange patches, particularly in some of the embayments, that these areas pose a high risk of toxicity to the diverse benthic marine populations that live there. Now we come to the Derwent Estuary in Tasmania, where there is a large amount of contamination as shown by the red patch covering the entire central channel of the estuary. This is a surprising result given the remote and small populations living in and around the estuary. It's only a small percentage of the population of Sydney and the other World Harbour estuaries. It goes to show you can't judge an estuary by its surface, as demonstrated by the Sydney and Derwent estuaries in Australia. They look so inviting for recreation and fisheries purposes. However, you look deep down into their waters, they pose the greatest threat to the benthic communities of all the World Harbour partner city estuaries that we've analysed so far.
The Working Group 2 Green Engineering Group is investigating ways in which green engineering solutions can combine the goals of ecology and engineering to produce artificial structures that benefit both humans and nature. These interventions can include retrofitting existing hard engineering structures, encouraging the use of hybrid structures, or working to promote the use of soft engineering solutions. Green engineering solutions can range from hard to hybrid to soft solutions. Green engineering solutions on hard structures often include retrofitting them with units that will enhance complexity or provide shade or water-retaining devices. A hybrid approach is where we encourage the use of habitat-forming species in artificial structures to provide shoreline protection, but also ecological benefits. A soft approach is where we go back to nature. We can encourage using natural shoreline stabilizing methods such as oyster reefs or salt marshes that will accrete soil and stabilize sediments to protect our coastal assets. The figure on this image shows a variety of techniques that have been deployed around the world to enhance ecological function on artificial structures. Some of these solutions include structures that you can retrofit onto an existing seawall, eco-friendly materials such as eco-concrete, an integrated approach where native salt marsh species can be incorporated into a shoreline stability project, or structures that promote the growth of oysters and fish habitat that serve as shoreline stabilization, but also critical fish nurseries. Or you can use structures such as oyster castles or reef balls that will not only promote oyster growth, thereby stabilizing shorelines, but also provide habitat for fish, thereby enhancing fisheries productivity. Ideally, green engineering concepts could be incorporated during the initial construction phase of marine infrastructure. However, we need to provide a solution where marine infrastructure already exists. Therefore, the Green Engineering Global Bivalve Experiment seeks to understand if we can retrofit existing seawalls with habitat-enhancing structures that will promote native bivalve survivorship and also native and non-native biodiversity. At 15 harbors across the world, we added tiles that had different levels of complexity. There were flat tiles, tiles that contained 2.5 centimeter ridges, or tiles that contained 5 centimeter ridges. We also seeded half of these tiles with native bivalves. Depending on the location, this was either oysters or mussels. Through time, we monitored bivalve survivorship and also colonization of the tiles by native and non-native biodiversity. This experiment was deployed in 15 of our global partners' harbors for a year. What we found is that across all locations, there was a greater percentage of survival of seeded bivalves on complex tiles than on the flat tiles. Through time, you can see that the 2.5 centimeter or 5 centimeter treatment had greater survival rates of seeded bivalves than the flat treatments. However, when you look at the different locations, you can see that the difference in survival between the complex 5 centimeter tiles and the flat tiles really depended on the types of stressors present at each location. For example, where there are larger predators such as fish or higher desiccation and temperature stress, we saw a greater effect of complexity on percentage of seeded bivalves. Where there were smaller predators such as snails, this effect was less pronounced. These results suggest that considering the different stressors at each location is really important when considering how complexity influences the percentage of seeded bivalves through time. Across all locations, we also looked at the total species richness, the total number of species living on the different tiles. What you can see from this graph is that across all locations, there's a general trend of increasing species richness with increasing complexity. However, you'll notice that at lower latitudes, where temperatures are more extreme, you see a greater effect of increasing of complexity on species richness. This again suggests that it's really important that we consider local conditions when designing green engineering solutions. In summary, from the Global Bivalve Experiment, we found overall enhancing seawall complexity does increase bivalve survivorship. It also increased the number of bivalve recruits, and we also saw greater species richness with increasing seawall complexity. However, the variation among locations around the world suggests that eco-engineering solutions for seawalls should consider local abiotic and biotic stressors when designing the most effective interventions. In order to have a positive effect at a meaningful scale, green engineering solutions need to be scaled up to larger, more permanent interventions. We found in the Global Bivalve Experiment that adding complexity to an existing seawall increases bivalve survivorship and also species richness. However, we want this to become a more permanent intervention across larger areas of seawalls. We also know we need to consider local conditions when applying these types of solutions to urbanized estuaries. Therefore, in Sydney Harbour, we developed the Living Seawalls program at the Sydney Institute of Marine Science. What this program is investigating is whether or not entire seawalls can be transformed into eco-friendly structures by retrofitting them with habitat-enhancing units. We're also trying to investigate how much green engineering is needed to see real ecological effects. Living Seawalls is a collaborative program based at the Sydney Institute of Marine Science. We have researchers from multiple universities around Sydney, as well as many PhD students working on addressing these questions of how we can scale up green engineering solutions in Sydney Harbour, Australia, and beyond. To determine whether or not we can scale up green engineering interventions, Living Seawalls has again collaborated with Reef Design Lab, the Melbourne-based industrial designer Alex Goad, to develop ecologically informed habitat-enhancing units that we can retrofit onto existing seawalls. As you can see from this slide, the Living Seawalls tiles have been designed to mimic features observed on natural rocky shores. We currently have 3 Living Seawalls installations in Sydney Harbour. At Sawmiller's Reserve, we have a full and partial Living Seawalls installation. Our full Living Seawalls installation has 72 tiles installed over a 12-meter section of seawall within the intertidal range of the seawall. The partial Living Seawalls installation has only 36 tiles, but also installed over a 12-meter. As with the Global Bivalve Experiment, the Living Seawalls project wants to understand how these tiles perform at increasing native bivalve survivorship, providing habitat for native species, and ameliorating environmental stressors. We're monitoring community composition from microbes to fish, and we're also mapping the habitat that these tiles provide, 1, by the actual structure of the tiles, and 2, by how they actually promote growth of other habitat-enhancing species, such as native bivalves or habitat-forming algae. Using eye-button temperature loggers, we can determine the temperature within microhabitats on each of the tiles, and determine how the different tiles ameliorate temperature stress. This graph shows the maximum temperature recorded on tiles from January to February 2019 during the Australian summer. And what this graph shows is the temperature inside microhabitats, so for example within the honeycomb holes, versus the outside, so the tile that's more exposed and in direct sunlight. What you can see is that on average across all the complex tiles, the inside temperatures are about 5 degrees Celsius cooler than the outside temperatures. Further, the temperature on the control tiles is more similar to the outside temperature. This suggests that microhabitats are very important in providing a cooler, more shaded environment for marine species. This is especially important in the summertime when marine life will experience greater desiccation and temperature stress. This graph shows colonization by primary and secondary sessile species on the complex tiles versus flat control tiles after 6 months in the field. Quickly, we can tell that across all intertidal heights, the complex tiles have a greater diversity of sessile species living on them compared to the control tiles. These results demonstrate how important it is to include complex habitat features that mimic natural habitats on artificial structures. Complex designs, informed by nature, are quickly colonized and help to support a more diverse community than we would expect to find on a flat, featureless structure.
If you look inside these units, this is what they effectively look like. There's rock armoring underneath in the core, and then we poured concrete in on top of this. As it was setting, we placed these buckets in, made sure that they made depressions in the concrete, removed them after the concrete had set, and effectively they retained water and functioned like rock pools.
The units which are below mid-low water were replaced by units made by our mixes and our design, and the same size, the same quantity in terms of structural performance than the standard performance that you see on the top. And we're still monitoring this project now. It's 3.5 years in the water.
As I started building artificial reefs, and I originally started building them out of just junk material, I started to gain an appreciation for how marine life used constructed materials in the marine environment, an appreciation for how we really needed to build better.
We're actually looking for like the worst quality 3D print. So we sort of played around with, kind of hacked our 3D printer to try to get it to print, really bad quality so that we could produce this sort of weird texture that Dave was talking about to do with protected space to get maximizing colonization.
eConcrete is a company that provides an innovative solution into marine urban infrastructure. eConcrete incorporates bioenhancing concrete additives and science-based designs into marine infrastructure.
A patented win-win solution that is based on 3 elements: the material composition, the surface texture, and the 3-dimensional design. These 3 components have a very strong synergistic effect that brings concrete to life. Not only do we get stronger and better ecosystems, richer, better biodiversity, lower carbon footprint, and higher aesthetics, we're actually making the structure stronger, more resilient, and have a better longevity. We're changing the way our ports and waterfronts look and function. The company is now shifting from demonstration installation to fully scaled mega infrastructure. For example, this project, the Living Breakwaters, it's a necklace of 9 breakwaters that is going to protect the coastlines of New York, and it is embedded with our e-concrete units. We have a very strong science-based, multidisciplinary team that helps us innovate and revolutionize a very conservative field and bring a win-win solution for coastal and marine infrastructure.
Ravenna is the major coastal city of Emilia-Romagna and the largest harbour of Western Adriatic. Its history is very old, as it dates back to the Roman Emperor Augustus, who based one of his imperial fleets here. The modern port of Ravenna was developed starting from 1737, when the old port of Ravenna was abandoned due to excessive siltation. After World War II, Ravenna became an important international port, when large gas fields were discovered offshore. The oil crisis of the 1970s further enhanced the port of Ravenna's position in the world market. Today, Ravenna is still one of the largest commercial seaports in Italy, appointed by the European Commission as core port of the Trans-European Transport Network. It is structured as a major canal port, extending for 11 kilometers from the center of Ravenna to the tourist seacoast. The canal is directly connected to the surrounding lagoons, which are comprised of the southern part of the Po Delta Park, inscribed in the World Heritage List, due to its outstanding natural and cultural landscapes. The harbour evolution has also affected the surrounding coastal areas, as the construction of 2 large converging jetties about 2.5 kilometers long to protect the harbour from siltation has altered the sediment transport and has shaped the nearby highly tourist beaches. Nowadays, projects are being developed to requalify disused port areas by using bioremediation and eco-engineering approaches, and to revitalize the natural and cultural maritime heritage of the city. Further, Ravenna authorities are promoting an active citizenship process of co-definition and identity repossess of the natural harbour spaces by the city residents. In this context, the World Harbour Project has represented a unique opportunity to share challenges and develop jointly solutions with many other harbours globally. It has also offered a unique opportunity of training for the students of the marine biology degree in Ravenna, who have enthusiastically collaborated to set up experiments, run social surveys, and organize public events.
The brackish lagoon, connected to the Ravenna port, are important nesting and overwintering areas for many bird species. They are very appreciated by citizens and tourists for leisure activities like birdwatching, canoeing, fishing, biking, and horseback riding. Among the provided goods and services, the lagoon supports the local clam fishery and largely contribute to wastewater treatment and nutrient recycling. However, the ecological integrity of these environments is threatened by multiple human activities. These types include thermal and chemical pollution coming from the industrial area, especially in the past, when wastewater and treatment plants were less regulated. And the increase of aquatic alien species whose arrival and success are facilitated by marine traffic, availability of artificial substrate, and reduced biological resistance. Today, thanks to the greater environmental awareness, scientists, managers, and citizens are working together to find and apply ecological-based solutions for a sustainable use of the natural heritage and environmental conservation.
Thank you everybody from beautiful Ravenna, and come and visit us!
Working Group 3 is the Multiple Uses and Users Working Group. Harbours are associated with many varied activities and uses with potential for user conflict. Working Group 3 projects are aimed at addressing users' issues, for example, by engaging with the community through surveys to determine how economics, environment, and culture alter the attitudes and perceptions of stakeholders towards eco-engineering.
We are in the city of Arraial do Cabo. It's located about 150 kilometers from Rio de Janeiro city, and it was for a long time just a fisherman village. So right now we have in the area a multiple use, include the fishermen, include the tourists, that's very strong right now, and also we have an area of protection. To integrate the different use of this area is very complicated. And then the World Harbour Project, it's very important to have a site here, because with this project we are able to discuss with the stockholders in the area of the city ways to preserve the environment, the pristine environment that we have here. We have a upwelling region, the strong upwelling in the Brazilian coast, and we try to preserve the biodiversity, also to prevent the arrival of the invasive species.
Over the last 2 decades, there's been great work done on contamination in Jakarta Bay. That science has immediately fed into the banning of all fishing in Jakarta Bay and the banning of collection of mussels. But we know that it's still happening. There's still a delicacy in Java. The reality versus the sort of just identify the contaminants and then ban it is one that we need to be a bit more aware of, I think.
Import all of your different data, map out different areas on the plan, and it gives you analytics on how that delivers on environmental and economic outcomes, as well as your social outcomes if you have that data. And you can talk to each other through the tool and compare maps and basically work together to develop the ultimate solution for your area.
Welcome to the Bay of Santander. We are part of the consortium that participate in the World Harbour Project. In one side, the Port Authority of Santander, in the other side, myself, José Antonio Juanes, I'm the Director of Capacity Building of the Environmental Hydraulic Institute of the University of Cantabria. We want to present you this beautiful place, this bay. The Santander Bay is one of the estuaries, the biggest estuaries in the north of Spain, and at the same time is the port of Santander. But from the environmental part that I will present you, this bay is very important for us because it's a very clear example of the interaction between different uses and different users. And then it's one of the main topics of the World Harbour Project, how to interact between the city, the harbour, the environment, and so on. In this space, we have about more than half of the space is intertidal areas, in which there are a lot of shellfish harvesting. We have some of the Natura 2000 sites, protected areas for conservation. We have about 9 different beaches and a lot of activity in the harbour. Thank you very much for this opportunity to present our bay, and then I will let the president of the port to present this part.
Hello everybody, welcome to the port, the bay and the city of Santander inside the region of Cantabria. I am Jaime González, the chairman of the port, and I am glad to have the opportunity to let you know more about our facility and our mission. We are 1% of the total port network system in Spain, so we are in the system a very small industrial site, but very important for the region as far as we produce 10% of the GDP and 9% of the employment. At the very end of the port, we have the industrial installation, the industrial facilities, and the mission of that is to produce growth, industrial growth, to produce the services that the hinterland is demanding. But overall, what is significant is that we have to live as good neighbors with all the environmental issues around the bay. One of the most beautiful bays in the world. We have to live in accordance with the fixing proposals that we have from different industrial actors, and also we have to live in combination with the urban waterfront, where step by step we are including more areas for the citizens of the city, and we are then trying to design the new layout of the area of the port. So all this together is a difficult task. We are at the moment proud to say that we are step by step producing a significant progression, and I think that you are welcome to come to Santander, and either the issue or the topic is related to the industrial road traffic or bulk traffic, either the topic is related to the city, environmental, fixing, tourists, or any other purpose living together in the bay. We are glad to share with you the best practices and the experience that we accumulate.
Working Group 4 is the education and engagement group that propagates information about the work that we do to the broader community and students. Working Group 4 engages in large educational projects such as the Billion Oyster Project and the Sunburst environmental programs that are aimed at engaging young scientists in environmental awareness and leadership. The Working Group 4 webinar series is an educational resource for university students, educators, and harbour users, providing scientific expertise on global harbours and ports, as well as topics relevant to harbours with similar problems in different locations.
Good evening, good morning, or good afternoon, depending where in the world you are. Welcome to the first World Harbour Project webinar. I suspect I know most of you, but for those who I don't know, my name is Peter Steinberg. I'm the director of the Sydney Institute of Marine Science and also the director of the World Harbour Project.
There's a goal in terms of restoration at the moment to make it productive again. We have a Billion Oyster Project, which combines both education and citizen science goals to restore 1 billion oysters, which is what was believed to be the original population when Henry Hudson first entered the estuary.
So the watershed spans these different physiographic provinces with the Appalachian Plateau, then this Ridge and Valley series, and then the Piedmont, which is rolling hills, which was deep sediments which were formed from the erosion historically of the Appalachian Mountains, and then this broad, flat coastal plain. And then the fall line, note where that is. That's where the sailors would go until you encounter the first waterfall. And that becomes very significant in the historical development of the bay.
The research group here in Dublin have used that system in a number of experiments to look at the characteristics of the receiving environment. For example, Selonian crow and Kinsellan crow looked at the effects of copper and freshwater on establishing and mature fouling assemblages.
Well, we are here in the Santander Bay, that at the same time you can see the 3 red lines that are the limit of the Santander Harbour. We will talk about a system that is a very human system. That means that the activities that have been developing in the last centuries in this area has been a mix of activities I will see later.
One of the strengths, I think, of the World Harbour Project is that we get different societal and cultural perspectives on the kinds of issues that we're interested in.
The industrial is not a big problem, it's very stable, but with the increase of the population, we have a really big problem for the domestic city.
Our schematic design for this eco-solar engineering project, we will plant some backshore vegetation to connect the land ecosystem to the marine ecosystem. Then we have mango plantation, the bio block, and also we'll have the oyster basket. The oyster will function to clean up the water and also could be used for consumption.
Hello, my name is John Burt. I'm an associate professor of biology at New York University, Abu Dhabi. And behind me you can see a lagoon system surrounded by mangroves as part of the Persian or Arabian Gulf as it's known here. This body of water contains a number of really important ecosystems, such as coral reefs, the mangrove forests that we have here, as well as those largest seagrass beds in the world almost. They make up 5% of the world's total seagrass beds. So we do have very important ecosystems that border these shores, and they're incredibly important for supporting diversity as well as acting as habitat for things like commercial species of fishes and various other organisms. Unfortunately, since the 1970s oil boom, the economies of the 8 countries bordering the Gulf have been increasing rapidly, and as a result we've had a lot of development of populations, and with that, coastal development. So upwards of 40% of the coastline of the Arabian Gulf is now man-made, and this is particularly true in the larger metropolises such as Dubai or Abu Dhabi. In these areas, because we have a growing population and limited amounts of land in some cases, there's been expansion of real estate into the sea, and on top of that we have these large populations that require basically the import of goods from all over the world in order to support the populations. So we have, for example, some of the world's largest container ports in Dubai, controlled by Dubai World. On top of that, we also have the infrastructure that goes with oil, so there's a lot of dredged channels, canals, and things like that that are supporting it, as well as a substantial amount of infrastructure that's in the sea to support the offshore oil industry. All of these things represent pressures on these important ecosystems that I've been discussing, and it's something that we are working on here using both science and management to try and inform better policies.
I hope that you now have some understanding of the work that the World Harbour Project does across the globe. As I said at the beginning of this presentation, we're focused on both trying to understand and where we can fix urban marine waterways across the world. You've heard about the diversity of projects that we do and the diversity of cities that are involved in those projects across the globe. I want to thank the commitment and the efforts of all the World Harbour Project partners across our 30-some cities. The World Harbour Project is 4 years old, and we've accomplished a number of really significant pieces of work and had an influence on how people view and manage their harbor. It's only the first stage. As the urban population grows, these issues that urban marine waterways face will also continue. And so we look forward to the World Harbour Project continuing to grow and to continue to address the diversity of problems and challenges that are faced by these iconic cities across the globe.